Welcome everyone to the latest installment of the Department of Education Reform's speaker series. My name is Patrick Wolf. I'm a member of the faculty. Oh, you can't hear? Loud or turn on? I don't think it's Oh, the button that says push me? That's what it is. Okay. So welcome to the Department of Education Reform Speaker Series event today. I'm Patrick Wolf. I'm a member of the faculty of the Department of Education Reform here at the College of Education and Health Professions. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker. Dr. Kevin Curtin is a, how would you describe it, a scholar practitioner of counseling and rehabilitation. He is the clinical director of the Frost School in Rockville, Maryland. The Frost School is this very effective and innovative nonprofit organization that serves children mainly with severe emotional disturbance or autism, and they do it on a contract basis with local education agencies. Basically, Kevin has been working there for many years, and now is the director of the clinical side of that school. He also is a faculty associate at Johns Hopkins University and George Washington University. And he's the best neighbor I've ever had. My wife and I had the pleasure of living 2 doors down from the Curtin family for 7 years on Flint Rock Road in Rockville. Yes, I was a good Barney Rubble to Kevin Flintstone. But it's my great pleasure to bring you out here to visit us in Arkansas. And of course, I mean, I can stand up here and share all kinds of reminiscences and anecdotes about backyard barbecues and our own ice storms and our children being born and things like that. You don't want to hear about that. You want to hear about Kevin Curtin's expertise in the areas of managing classrooms in particularly challenging environments with particularly challenging students. So I give you Dr. Kevin Curtin.
I would like to hear you talk about me more and more about being a good neighbor, actually. If you want to come back up, that's a good name. Thanks, Pat. Thanks for that introduction. Thanks to the Department of Education Reform for having me. I'm really flattered, actually. I want to thank Nick Chepikow for organizing last night's event. It turned out really well. And all the other staff members and doc students that I've met and for organizing this. I know for the doc students it's such a burden to go out to dinner with me and breakfast at all these nice restaurants. I appreciate you putting up with that, by the way. Thank you, Dr. Wolf, who I believe has much to do with my presence here today. I'm not someone with a policy background, and even a whole lot of research experience. I'm kind of new at this postdoctoral stuff. But from what I understand, Dr. Wolf must have convinced the department that I might add a perspective, given all my years of, I think, working in the trenches of special education, without any battle fatigue, I might add. But hopefully I can give you something today on classroom management, strategies, a way of thinking about it. That's what I'd like to do. So I want to provide an overview of classroom management unique to the profession I am in. Anybody have that teacher once? I did. I want to talk briefly about my experience at the Frost School and the population we serve as a way to provide some guidance that may be applicable to the students you will be working with. There are grad students here, so I think that's important. I want to discuss the scope of the problem, that is, the statistics on where we are with school discipline issues, where we've come from, and where we need to go from here. Obviously, I think teacher retention and attrition is an issue. I want to talk a little bit about that. The need for professional development around this issue of school discipline. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about a few approaches: positive behavior supports, sometimes known as positive discipline, the use of class meetings. If you can take away something from this lecture, maybe there's a few ideas about where I think people are going with discipline and classroom management today. Okay? And hopefully this time I want to review some of the research, because I think that'll be useful as well, the research on positive behavior supports. Today's not going to be a lecture where I'm going to give you quick fixes based on particular behavior scenarios. You can find that in the pre-referral manuals, you can find that in textbooks, you can find it online in Google, any sort of situation. They'll come up with a behavioral strategy. That's very easy to do. I'd like to give you a different way of thinking about classroom management. A model that will help you improve the overall climate of your classroom, build more positive relationships with students, and empower them to become more responsible, more motivated as learners. This lecture is primarily informed by my professional career, which has been a blend of special education, of course, mental health counseling, group psychotherapy, and essentially the many years my work with students with emotional disabilities, also known as emotional and behavior disorders, at-risk youth, essentially students who are pretty resistant to education and treatment. Now I hope that the population I work with is pretty unique and I think pretty rare. Right? I would like to be able to give you something from what we do that can again be applicable to students in the regular education setting. My role has been, I need to tell you that I've never been a teacher before. I've never taught elementary school. I've never taught middle school students. I've never taught high school students. I've only taught graduate students from colleges and universities. And while you're kind of a hassle in your behavior, you're not really that bad as the kids I work with. My role for the last 16 plus years at the Frost School has been more, obviously as a counselor, but very importantly a consultant to work collaboratively with teachers. And that's what I've done. And the lessons from special education I hope to share with you today come from years of that important collaborative work and consultation with a multidisciplinary team of professionals. So even if you don't learn anything today, I think let your graduate students know when you get into the profession that you have the answers as long as you work with your team, okay? To bring together a multidisciplinary team when you're really struggling with students, I think is very necessary because those are where the answers come from. They come from the variety of expertise that are in schools today. We do this collaborative approach, this integration of not just education, but of therapy, OT, psychiatric, social workers, and that collaborative work occurs daily, and that's why it's successful. Let me tell you a little bit about the trenches Dr. Wolf referred to. We're a Type 1 non-public special education school, elementary through high school in Rockville, Maryland. We're designed to meet the needs of students who are unable to succeed in the regular education settings, as he said, because of severe emotional disabilities. Now, what interests me most about these students are the difficulties they have with their interpersonal skills. We make it a point to address this. And we think that that's where some of the behavior problems occur, is that in terms of the federal code, part of the definition is they have difficulties making and maintaining effective interpersonal relationships with others. Their peer group, adults, teachers, parents, future employers. And so this is what fascinates me most about this population. As such, we offer a continuum of services That includes counseling, crisis intervention, family counseling, group therapy, and that's how we're addressing it. We also have a variety of ways of managing behaviors, facilitating, creating a class atmosphere that's conducive to learning. And so I'd like to share that with you. One such intervention we use at Frost is what's called therapeutic community. I'll be brief about this because it has something to do with the direction I'm going in today with what I think can be useful in regular education. Therapeutic community is a treatment approach that can provide students with opportunities to experience peer support for actual problems as they occur in the here and now. That's a group counseling term, the here and now. So when problems occur, let's discuss them. Let's discuss the processes that are happening, how we can maybe do it differently. So there's an active method of teaching social skills in that way. It's an alternative to curriculum-based social skills training, as well as an alternative to behavior modification programs. Those types of programs are much more prevalent in special education. The therapeutic community is common, actually, the most common in hospitals, residential treatment centers, prisons even, and they have an emphasis on community meetings, okay? An emphasis on community meetings to foster the development of those interpersonal skills that I have said are very interesting to me. It shares similarities with a particular model of classroom management called positive discipline. Positive discipline is an approach being used more and more in public school settings. One of the techniques they use, not community meetings, but classroom meetings, and teachers are being trained in facilitating what's called classroom meetings. But before we get to this application, let's see here. A bit of a brief definition here. Solution focused, that's an important term. Active teaching, modeling, reinforcement of positive behavior, so you get into a token economy, if you will. And preparing students for responsible citizenship, or the way I like to see it is that's where we're addressing the interpersonal skills. All right. School discipline, where do we come from? Some time ago, I don't know when, even when I was a kid, I grew up in grade school in the 70s and in high school in the early 80s. These were the big issues. Talking out of turn, making noises when the teacher's talking, cutting in line, running in the halls. These were the major issues. Chewing gum in class. However, today, obviously you hear about more severe issues, more serious issues. Vandalism, truancy, drug use, drug possession, violence, assault, the kinds of things that get students suspended, of course, and even expelled. And of course, school shootings. This is an unfortunate picture from the Columbine way back there in the late 90s, I think. Students are at risk even more today than they were in the past. There's teasing and bullying, of course, and that's not new, but for some reason either it's more prevalent or maybe we're taking it more seriously, focusing on bullying prevention programs. So it's still there, of course. If students are feeling unsafe at school or on their way to school or on their way home from school, they're reporting that. 46% of males have been in physical fights, 26% of females. These are statistics from the American Justice Department, Centers for Disease Control, different things. Since Columbine, there have been 29 other instances of school shootings since Columbine. And of course, gang involvement remains high, and as you know, it's a powerful predictor of future violence. I was with teachers last night, and I was saying all this, and I'm hoping I'm not scaring them, of course, and I don't mean to scare you, because there's another perspective here also, that while we see all this and we're very concerned about this, research from a guy by the name of Fred Jones, I'm sure you've heard of him, in UCLA, his research found that 99% of the disruptive or the off-task behaviors are those that are talking out of turn, trying to be the class clown, daydreaming in class, and moving around without permission. And so the point is, the conclusion that dangerous behaviors we hear about so often, these are actually rare. Okay, actually rare. Most of the issues of classroom management and instructions are not going to be this. That's from his research. At the same time, it's still very much a concern for beginning teachers especially. So we don't want to take the little stuff too lightly. If we do, that will get out of hand. If not managed effectively, it really will. Teasing becomes bullying, bullying becomes fighting. So you've got to find a way to be able to manage. Right? The other concern is we're facing issues around teacher retention and teacher attrition. Many beginning teachers leave the profession too early in their careers. And it includes very qualified individuals, unfortunately. Almost 1/10 of new teachers nationwide leave the profession within the first year. 1/5 will leave the profession within 3 years, and 1/3 within 5 years. And then you look at the more disadvantaged districts, and those rates are even higher. There are a number of reasons why this is so. Retirement is not one of those reasons. I'm talking about beginning teachers here. The top reasons teachers cite include lack of planning, heavy workload, a lack of influence over school policy, and, of course, problematic student behavior. That ranks among the top reasons why beginning teachers leave. And that's from the 2001 Department of Education survey, teacher survey. A more recent survey, K through 12 teachers, that finds that what teachers need most in terms of professional development has to do with classroom management. So you see where we're going here. The focus, their preference would be a focus on making sure students' negative behaviors are not going to be, are not an ongoing distraction to teachers. Making sure that students are socially and emotionally safe in the classroom, and making sure that all students participate in classroom interaction. I don't know if you can see that, but can you help me, Mrs. Martin? This wasn't covered in any of my education. And I don't, Jay and I were talking earlier, I don't know how much is really covered in terms of classroom management. And if not, I think we need to really look at that for the graduate students who are aspiring to become teachers. At the same time, there needs to be more in terms of professional development. You can cover that during their graduate years, and yet, once you get in the classroom, you're really going to need to continue to maintain some of those skills, some of those ways of dealing with disruptive behavior. So, now I can go over a few standard principles for classroom management. But to do that, at least I kind of take the chance of maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, because I think there's a lot of obviously competent people here. But I really came up with this last night for the teachers in Springdale, and I think it was well received, because what I found out was that sometimes they forget, sometimes they, when you're working in the trenches, and you tend to lose objectivity sometimes, because it can be a high burnout profession. So we need constant reminders, I think, and constant peer support and mentoring. For instance, come to class prepared. Now that sounds like a no-brainer, but I like to say to teachers, overdo it. Overdo your lesson plans. you know, when there's 10 minutes left in class or 15 minutes left in class, and the students have nothing to do, well, that is prime time for fooling around. Okay, so overdo the lesson plans. Engage students in a variety of ways. Now, this is all classroom management. I'll get to disruptions shortly, okay? Engage students in a variety of ways. When you can engage them to respond individually, when you can engage them to respond as a group, that can be a very dynamic way of teaching. Have written responses come together and presented orally, group work, peer tutoring, computerized instructions. I have a variety of ways of engaging students. Keep it energetic, keep it dynamic. I said to the teachers this night, don't turn your back to the class. I know you know that. I know you know that. Some will do that, and some will get hit in the head with an eraser, of course. So I have to say that. Acknowledge appropriate behaviors, praise. I like class incentives. You know, that promotes group work and cooperative learning. Move around the room. You know, don't just sit behind your desk at your computer and expect the class to just work. Get up and move around. Non-verbal cues, the Jedi approach, I call it, when there's some minor disruption going on, sometimes it just takes a look and you stop. You can see Yoda doing that. That can work well sometimes. My point of saying that is try to avoid being confrontational. That invites resistance anyway. And obviously when there are potentially hostile situations and unsafe, that's a different story. But you can quell, I think, in subtle ways, the potential for disruptive behavior. Nip it in the bud, as I say. And be confident in your teaching. Be a confident teacher. They expect you to be the expert. You are the expert. And how you present and how you come across in a confident manner will go a long ways. When it comes to class disruptions, all right, that's a different story. Much of the way we currently handle disruptions is on an individual basis. When a student misbehaves in class, we send them out of class. We give them detentions. We send them to the office. My son, who is an 8th grade student in a public middle school, I asked him, what do the teachers do when the students misbehave? And he replied that they usually just send them in the hall, just to stand in the hall. Sometimes down the streets, mostly they just get them out of the class, stand in the hall 5 or 10 minutes, they can come back, and that's kind of it. And it's nice to know in some ways that we come some way from in the corner with the dunce cap, of course. But I look at this as I understand it, I kind of get it. You know, we want to teach. We want to take on these issues individually. We're looking for a quick fix. We need to teach, so, you know, remove the distraction. All right? And it's effective, but I think it's only effective in the short term. I think it's short-term convenience. You know, and I'm wondering, are we really getting long-term results when providing discipline in this way? It's like putting out small fires. They'll just reignite, unfortunately. Removing disruptive students from the classroom, for many, especially attention-seeking kids, that only reinforces them, okay? It also diminishes, I think, the connection or the relationships we have with students as well. And finally, I think it undermines the connection between academics and social learning. I think schools have to be more about academics. Obviously, that's the emphasis, but we have opportunities for social learning with our students. Teachers, especially new teachers, obviously are concerned with providing effective classroom management and discipline in terms of disruptions. You know, we want it to be ideal. We would love it if all day long, all school year long, there would be minimal disruptions. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. We have to understand that there are complexities to behaviors. And I like this iceberg analogy. I think it's a way to understand. I think as teachers, we need to understand in terms of theory that we see behaviors, the tip of the iceberg, right? We see the class clown, we see the disruptions. We can easily recognize when someone's bullying or school failure. What we don't necessarily see are the underlying issues, the reasons behind it. Students come to school with anxiety. Students come to school maybe bringing in problems. Fight that morning with their parents, bullied on the way to school. We're not necessarily going to know that, but I think we have to keep it in mind. It helps me at least when it's March. It's been a long school year, and a kid is acting up, and I kind of think, well, just a jerk, what a bad kid, and you have to understand that there's more than that probably going on. There's more than that. So the other thing we have to understand are there are functions of behaviors as well. This is Adler and Dreikers, Rudolf Dreikers. As I said earlier, some kids will, this is a model of in terms of goals of misbehavior. Some kids will misbehave and act up for attention. All right, that's one. Some will act up for power, a child, a student who wants to be the boss, in charge. Some for revenge, and that's a little more concerning. A student or a child who just wants to hurt others, and that certainly would probably have an interesting ideology as well. Assumed inadequacy, what that means is those are the kids who don't want to engage, want to hide, and of course that's difficult, and obviously the solution there is to try and engage them. I'm going too far ahead of myself here. So I say this to you so we can understand that both the complexities and the functions of behavior. It doesn't mean tolerating it, of course. Right? Understanding is one thing, but we don't need to tolerate the behavior. But I do think, getting back to this way of handling discipline individually, I do think we need to consider changing the short-term fix of handling disruptions. I'm suggesting that instead of continuing to remove disruptions, and again, a disclaimer here that when there's safety issues and potentially hostile students, that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. But instead of continuing to remove them, instead of sending students out in the hall, why don't we take more of a prevention focus for classroom-based discipline issues? Such a model would engage a wider array of students, promote cooperation, mutual respect, and most importantly, gain long-term results, because that's what we're looking for. We want to reduce the amount of suspensions, the amount of office referrals. And so one promising intervention that I'm starting to see more is term positive discipline, or positive behavioral supports. I think that's making its way across the country. This is based on the work of Adler and Dreikers. It's being championed by positive behavior interventions and supports, Jane Nelson, PBIS.org. It's doing wonderful things in terms of reducing suspensions, which I'll get to shortly in terms of the research. But it actively teaches and reinforces appropriate skills and competencies that result in good behaviors. It manages negative behaviors in a kind and firm way. I don't mean kind, it's not a soft program, let me tell you that. I mean, but it does take the emotional element out. It sees that managing disruptions and providing classroom management is an opportunity for students to learn. It represents a paradigm shift from the traditional behavior management, which focuses primarily on problems and punishments. And as I said, this is more of a solution-oriented program with positive reinforcement. It addresses classroom management issues. It focuses again on interpersonal learning of students and allows for the development of a more healthy academic climate. I want to go back to a little bit of research. There's research on what is an effective school. You've probably seen this. This is why I think we lean more towards this positive discipline model. I was wondering about, why is there such, other than the research, but why do we lean that way? Because in a sense, there's not a lot of research on particular classroom meetings, but still, people really feel that this is something to really look into. And I think that has to do with part of the key factors that go into what makes an effective school. And as you know, effective schools really emphasize academics. They have high academic expectations. They also have a good deal of parents and community support. That's what makes effective schools. The school leadership is solid. There's collegiality among the staff, and I've been blessed for almost 17 years now to work with a tight group of professionals who support each other. And even when we disagree, we're constantly, I think, open to communicating and trying to figure things out for the best of the students. But here's what I think is why we lean more towards positive discipline. One of the factors in an effective school is when students have a sense of belongingness with their school, with their teachers. Students who feel a sense of community are more likely to perform better in school. Let me take this point further. The research suggests that the quality of relationships between teachers and students is a protective factor. It actually improves resiliency, even with potentially at-risk youth. Students who have a sense of connection with their schools are less likely to be involved in a negative peer group and more likely to be successful academically. So let's look at positive discipline here. Jane Nelson, who wrote this book on positive discipline, lists 5 criteria. Help the students feel a sense of connection. So we're trying to promote the relationships between students and teachers, but students and their school. They can feel like they belong, they can feel like it's their school. It's mutually respectful and encouraging. It has long-term effects. And again, it actively teaches important social and life skills. It also invites students to discover how capable they are. What I mean by that is it's an empowering method. And one of the major techniques, why this is empowering, one of the major techniques in positive discipline is the use of class meetings. So that's where I want to get to right now. Periodic class meetings is an approach that teaches students important skills such as listening, taking turns, hearing other points of view. It can be applied elementary through high school. It's not just for elementary and middle school students, by the way. How to communicate, how to support each other, taking responsibilities. It invites students to become part of classroom management. So it's a little innovative there, where the teacher doesn't have to be the disciplinarian the whole time. Okay? It invites the whole class to become part of it. And the teacher will take on the role of facilitator. Students become partners in contributing to the positive climate of the class. Let's take a look at the logistics. Class meetings should be consistent. Depending on the behaviors I think that are going on, I mean, some classes will struggle more than others. They can occur once a week. They can occur every day if you need to. But take about 10 minutes from your class and have a class meeting. Focus on some of the disruptive issues, the off-task issues. Brainstorming is very useful in that way. Get some of your positive kids, some of your leader type of kids, to talk about how they're affected by the disruptions. So really, it's a facilitative role that the teacher takes on to engage students in problem solving and brainstorming. It will allow, over time, trust to develop and a climate of mutual respect. And I think what people are saying is that over time it reduces the misbehavior but increases instructional time. Now the hesitancy has been, why take 10, 15 minutes out of class every day when I could be teaching? And I think in the long run, it'll make sense. It'll make sense. So, the criteria for effective class meeting. I have the conductor icon there because that's my way of saying the teacher needs to be a facilitator. Right? There's no monarchy here when you're running a class meeting. You've got to be good at facilitating. Just as you would facilitate an exercise in critical thinking, maybe on a piece of literature or a poem or something. You know, you've got to be facilitating. This is not lecturing. Right? If you lecture too much, they'll tune you out. Right? Class meetings should be consistent. You know, as I said, perhaps every day. You need that once a week is fine if that's what it takes. I don't necessarily think you need to form a circle. Logistically, I don't think that's possible anyways. I think you can still have an effective discussion, but that's one of the criteria that you'll see. Focus on solutions, focus on expectations and positives. Ask the class, you know, what's working well with you individually, and why. In terms of positive reinforcement, again, you can bring a token economy into it. Make a class incentive. Let the disruptions cease. If there are no major problems in the class this week, then what kind of ideas do you have in terms of any incentive? You can do that. Class meetings also provide an opportunity for the class to develop ground rules. And usually that's around respect, listening, when to speak, raising hands, of course. And class meetings also have an agenda. You create an agenda. You allow kids to have a voice in determining what they want to talk about as well. Typical agenda items, I said developing ground rules, but also discussing expectations around academics, around behaviors. I think when expectations are clear and they're at the forefront, that makes a lot of sense for students. It's a reason, I think, when you constantly review them, that students, I think, feel more secure and will live within the rules. I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. Dealing with off-task or disruptive behaviors obviously should go on the agenda. Paying attention in class, obviously teasing, making fun of others. These are all types of things that can go on a class meeting agenda. Now, a typical format, you could start with compliments, okay? Having students and the teacher talk about what's going well. You may want to end with compliments also. I think that can be part of a nice routine or ritual. Review what is going well in class and why. Take agenda items at some point and discuss anything. Talk about maybe what the class would like to do as a class, incentives there, or field trips, class rewards. I understand that. One of the things is, will this work for everyone? All right. This has shown a lot of promise, all right. But I am aware that this may not work for any particular student. There's always that one student in class that this is not going to be effective with. All the while, the class can still grow, all right, because maybe they're going to develop more patience, maybe they're going to learn some ways of expressing their frustration, perhaps. So the teacher becomes active in modeling that and perhaps asking students, to be patient, to handle this particular student, in a more appropriate way. With positive behavioral supports, that's more of a system-wide approach to management in terms of behaviors. There's always, I think, when you define your expectations and define your rules, you're going to capture about 80 to 90% of the students who are going to do well with that. At the same time, you're probably going to get into a more secondary than tertiary approach to prevention, because there's going to be about 5 to 10% of students who are still going to be disruptive, who are still going to have problems, and I think you've got to go to other methods then. You really do. And so what's offered is particular programs, behavior modification, then there's a check-in, check-out program that you're potentially at-risk students who are going to have trouble maybe with living within the rules. You need to maybe work, a school counselor probably would need to be brought in, work with that student, maybe on a contract, on a particular individualized token economy, perhaps some rewards or incentives there. Make sure the consequences are well-defined and clear for these particular students. You may have to do a functional behavior analysis. Okay, that goes back to average writer's goals. What's the reason for the disruptions? What's the reason for the misbehavior? Let's analyze this in terms of when is this happening, what time of day. So again, there's going to be a certain amount of students you're going to have to target, I don't mean that in a negative way, but to really look at these kids are going to fall through the cracks if we don't do some sort of tertiary prevention. Right? And so more than just class meetings, again, behavior modification perhaps, dropout prevention, because that could likely happen, social skills instruction, daily behavior report cards. Right? Again, this comes from PBIS, okay? Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. I would encourage anyone here to look into this in terms of the state of Arkansas. It's big in Illinois, it's big in Maryland, it's big in Connecticut. It's growing especially in terms of its recognition as an evidence-based practice, having randomized control trials, evaluation studies. Classroom meetings is a strategy within positive behavioral supports. Significant reductions in school suspensions. We were talking earlier, where are we going with school suspensions? I'd be interested in comparing those schools with positive behavioral supports versus those schools without, and see what you come up with there. Not as many studies with classroom meetings. There are some that there we go. With class meetings, there's a study in Sacramento that found a decrease in suspensions, improvement in class atmosphere, teacher reports of class atmosphere, behavior, and academic performance, and of course, decreased incidence of delinquency. This is the Child Development Project in 1997. It's a qualitative study that found class meetings improved school climate factors such as trust, the ability to problem solve, relationships with teachers and peers, and a reduction in the number of office referrals. So very few studies, but again, along with the testimonials, the anecdotal information we have, I think this is a method I believe warrants further investigation. Now, why does it work? Obviously I've talked about the importance of a student's sense of connection with the school. I think that's a factor. I think the active teaching, the modeling, and the positive reinforcement, I think is a factor as well in why it works. When we get back to the idea of when you clearly define rules, when a system of rules, expectations, is clearly defined, is implemented in a consistent way, and students see it as fair, I think that's a factor as well, and that's what positive behavioral supports do. Okay? It's very important for your students to understand and to see that, even though I might disagree, at least I'm being treated fairly, I'm being treated like everyone else here. And students will tend to live within the rules more if they're clearly defined and if they're consistent and fair. The other thing about if any schools do go to a positive behavioral support intervention is there's a great deal of emphasis on monitoring and evaluation. It's critical that when you implement this, that not only should you monitor? And I think one of the big reasons they like to monitor and evaluate is I think they're bragging. I think they really think this is the system that's doing wonders in terms of reduction in suspension. So they want to write about it, of course. But obviously, when you monitor and you track progress and you evaluate, you're giving yourself room to adjust, to tweak it, and you're going to see that's going to be necessary. So you're constantly having an eye on implementation and student outcomes. And that constant eye on that connection is very important as well. I'm going to conclude here. Again, one of the biggest questions is when you're implementing class meetings or going towards a positive behavioral support kind of method, you're taking time away from academics, but again, you're trying to gain time for academics in the long run. And I think in the literature I've read and teachers I've taught with, that's their biggest hesitation. But you have to trust that this is a process, and it does take some time, and it's never going to be smooth at first. But it is showing some promise, and again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. All right, you're going to have to remember that there are going to be other, strategies you're going to have to bring in, especially for those 5% of kids who are not going to probably be successful with this. All right. So I don't know how I am with time, but there I am. I can take questions, I suppose.
Since we are taping this session, we ask that you identify yourself before you ask the question. And I'm going to model that behavior myself now and use the prerogative of the first question. So I'm Patrick Wolf from the Department of Education Reform. And my question to you, Dr. Curtin, is you mentioned token economies. Could you elaborate a bit on the role that token economies play in positive discipline and support, and maybe provide some examples from your own experience?
Some teachers go all out. They have like monopoly money, and they have a banking system, and it takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of data, it takes a lot of calculating, and so I've known teachers who have developed this bank, and when the students do well, that's fake money in the bank, and you can use that money for certain things, maybe even to buy off a consequence perhaps, or to use it for a reward. I personally feel that there are certain consequences that shouldn't be bought off. Okay, I like the idea of the token economy being used to buy treats, if it will. In my experience, they love food. Students love food. So in our school, we feel a little more unique in that on Fridays we can collect 15 fake dollars, we call them coupons, and go out and budget for this. Go out and buy the kids some fast food or something like that, within a budget, of course, as well. Token economies is an example of positive reinforcement, of course, and you can tie into behavioral contracts as well. For instance, behavioral contracts. The people who are experts at this are these behavioral specialists, and so they build on it and they scale back. You make it easy for them to, especially in more difficult cases, set it up for success early. All right. If it's too difficult to earn that token, let's say, they're not going to buy into the contract. In fact, work with the students. Let's develop a contract. What do you want? What do you like? Let's just talk about it. Let's see what we can do. And they might give you an idea. Well, I have no suspensions for the whole month of January. You might say to yourself, ain't gonna happen. How about this week? How about today? You're not suspended today. All right, so you might have to keep it short term as well. My experience has been that the student will feel better about themselves, feel successful. All right.
I'm James Schultz, a PhD student in education policy. You work at a school where the students are obviously pulled out of the general classroom.
That's right.
At what point would you recommend that students are pulled out instead of mainstreamed into the classroom?
I'm not sure I understand. Pulled out of the general education school?
Or in the classroom to more of a specialized classroom or curriculum within the school, or to a specialized school like yours.
Mm-hmm.
At what point should a student be taken out of the generalized, the main classroom and into more of a specialized classroom?
I see. That's a decision that one person can't answer. In fact, it has to be a team decision. It has to involve a battery of testing, educational testing, psychological testing, at least for our students, and recommendations from a whole array of people, school psychologists, principals, teacher reports, parents, the student himself as well, depending on the age of the student, should be involved in that decision. So at what point, I think when, first of all, is there a disability? Okay, is there a documented disability? And we were talking last night that decision isn't made lightly. It does take testing from experts to really determine that. In terms of where we are, that can be vague sometimes. Emotional disability. Right? Just because you act up in school and you're failing, does that mean you have an emotional disability? I don't know. Okay. Under the term emotional disability, you have a variety of diagnoses: bipolar, major depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxieties, the different anxieties from the DSM. And yet, there are students who have these diagnoses that are doing fine in public schools. So, what's the answer? Yes, way in the back.
Carol, teaching student in curriculum instruction. Can you share with us some cases that you encounter in your daily experience that you think you can share with us? And then how did you deal with it, or how did you stop it? And then,
well, I'll share a student who's even having, I think, even at risk of losing her placement at our school. She's got severe bipolar disorder, and she doesn't take her medication. She's 20 years old. I hope she does well academically this year, because she may not make it, past 21 to get her high school diploma. She constantly is having difficulties staying in class. So we'll call these community meetings when she's disruptive and when she cusses at the teacher and doesn't want to do the work. We will gather her peer group, a community meeting, and my approach is a gentle approach, an empathic approach. I understand you're having trouble. Can you say what that's about? And she's very insightful to be able to say what led up to my behaviors, how she's feeling this about. One of the things in the iceberg is adolescent developmental themes. Okay, and so for her it could be friends, for her it could be identity, who knows. So she's very good about identifying the reason she's misbehaving. But the problem is, to go back to class and it's one step forward, two steps back. It doesn't seem to be making a difference. We involve the students, the other students, to say how it's affecting them. I'm not going to use your name, but so-and-so, I really wish you'd handle yourself, because I'm having a hard time learning. So I engage the students in this community meeting type of approach to be able to let her know that it's affecting her friends as well. And we try and engage them in that. And all the while, students will get frustrated, and you teach them to be able to give constructive feedback in an appropriate way so the student can hear and not be defensive about it. And that's the approach we use, and sometimes that's successful with most of our students. I think it's successful. Now and then it's successful with her. Sometimes I have to, and the other counselors have to meet her individually, and she'll maybe disclose even more. So That's more of a therapeutic approach, of course, but going back to the idea of community meetings and help her, that's an example of a pretty difficult student to help her, okay? Okay, purple shirt, and then Dr. Green next.
Bob Moranto in Education Reform. Really love the talk. The methods seem very sensible. One thing struck me, a lot of the research you cite is very old, and so I'm wondering...
The one study, 1979.
Yeah, I'm wondering what have its notable things on since then, and if not much has been done, why not, and what needs to be done in terms of research?
The research on...
This is Dr. looking for these studies.
Yeah. The research on the system-wide positive behavioral supports is fresh, it's new, all right? I was looking at classroom meeting research, which, you know, in fact, that one in 1979 is seen as probably the most rigorous of the 4 or 5 they showed there. So, and, you know, like I said, unfortunately, I wish there were more research on it. I think it warrants further studies. So, but I can always go to pbs.org, and again, there's a lot of evidence-based studies out there that are showing, you know, some very, very promising results there for the system-wide, not the particular classroom-based. All right. Yes.
Earlier, you were describing some of the...
Who are you?
I'm sorry, Jay Green. Thank you. I'm Jay Green, Department of Education Reform. Earlier, you were describing some of the reasons that students have for misbehavior, and one of which was attention, and including negative attention, right? Students will take what they can get sometimes. This often creates a vicious circle where students misbehave in order to get attention, even negative attention, and then that's reinforced, and then they get more misbehavior. I'm wondering if classroom meetings are a form of attention or reward for misbehavior. So if students misbehave, and then the whole class kind of, you know, stops and then gathers around and discusses my misbehavior, I mean, it might be a pretty good reward. Is that
you kind of reinforce the negative behavior?
Right. So and this is just, I meant just generally a problem for teachers, is that it's like a hostage situation where there's a whole classroom that they're trying to educate, and someone's misbehaving, and they have to figure out how to stop that without rewarding it.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if you could help describe how your techniques that you've been describing, or some other techniques, would address negative behavior without rewarding with attention.
You make a great point, because by even calling a class meeting, you're calling attention to that negative behavior for those particular students. So there's 2 scenarios I could provide. One is call a class meeting, but let's focus the solution on how can we give you the attention you need in a positive way. You know, brainstorm. I don't know if you say that explicitly, you know, but you can. You can talk about, students can talk about, you seem to be wanting attention. So let's brainstorm here, and let's focus on what is it you need. Let's give you positive attention. You don't have to do a class meeting for that. You can, to me, the issue is how you give attention, catch them doing positive things is really, I think, the rule out there for that particular type of student. And I think it takes hard work for a teacher to constantly be, and sometimes it's kind of, you know, a little overdone to catch them in their successes. And at the same time, this is someone, Jane Nelson, talking about positive reinforcement, solution focus, and so on. I'm not a believer that you just don't have limits and you don't have consequences either. All right. Sometimes the students, you know, if they go out of bounds, they're, you know, let's be realistic, you know, needs that consequence also. Yes.
My name is Lala Hendermoy. I'm a parent, not an educator. I'm a parent of 2 second graders.
Yeah.
And he has some official diagnosis of some disabilities that he has: ADHD, mild Asperger's,
sensory integration. So he's got a little bit of everything, and he's a very complicated little boy. But I wanted to first make a comment that the change that the school made in the reward system this year, that all the teachers and the staff, he goes to Root Elementary in Fayetteville. And kindergarten and first grade, it was hell. I mean, he had all kinds of difficulties, and although we went into the school with the support system, already having the diagnosis, he really had a difficult time. This year, they implemented the positive catch them, what they do when they're doing well, throughout the school. All the teachers follow the same method, whereas before, every teacher had their own way of doing things. And that has made a big difference in his behavior in the classroom. It's truly been a night and day and a blessing what has happened. So Ruth, to me, has just employed a very exemplary method that you mentioned. But my question is that when you focus on giving them compliments all the time whenever they're doing well, as they grow, how much dependent are they going to be on external validation that somebody's going to have to recognize me all the time, or I'm going to misbehave? How does that affect the child in the long term? And also the other question is that do you follow them beyond the school years? As to really, I mean, is there a way to see how they will, when they're adults, and how do they do in the job market and the boss presents something they don't like? And the third one, I'm just going to put it in, is that one thing they put in was the peer education. In the fifth grade, they put a slideshow together talking about the issues in a way that doesn't identify the child, but put the whole class in front of a PowerPoint presentation and talks about different behaviors. Some children behave differently, some children deal with things differently, and what can class do to support them. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because kids are smart and they know, well, which is the kid that is behaving this way? Does that mark the child in any way? And by the way, he's mainstream, he's not separated, and I think that's good. So,
your first question on compliments, and I think at a certain, there are certain kids who have trouble, I think in psychology and counseling, called self-soothing, okay? So they need that. There comes a time, of course, that they're going to be able to eventually do that themselves. But I really, I don't know if I'm worried about dependencies. I am the other side if you don't do enough of that. But there comes a point where they're going to have to do that themselves. And I think over time, this is more like a humanistic theory, person-centered, that if you can provide that acceptance of them as a human being, and they will pick up on it, and their self-esteem will improve. So I'm not worried about that. I'd be more worried about if for every little thing they did right, you gave them, a token more. I think encouragement and praise, will get to their internal sense of validation versus just doing it for the token. Your second question, give me a hint.
What was the peer education?
No, where do they go after?
Where they go after? Yes.
As a school, we're not doing any particular follow-up studies. We keep in touch with students, of course, but in Maryland and New Jersey, they're doing a longitudinal study on the success of students in non-public special education schools. And this is to show, and it's all kinds of outcomes in terms of where they are in 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. And we're really looking at, are they in college, completing college, employed, and so on. We're looking at living independently, and it's currently going on. We're excited about it because we're seeing good data, and I can go down to Capitol Hill in May and give them this stuff because that's the thing I do, or I can go to Annapolis as well and show them that the types of programs for these challenging students does make sense, even though it's costly, but it is working. And your third question
peer education.
is that you said kids are smart, so would that be a problem with exposing them and so on? Yeah, I think you got to be careful with that. I think you got to be careful because the one thing about this is, you don't want it to be judgmental. You don't want it to be humiliating. Okay, but there's got to be some realism in the fact that if your destructive behavior is having an effect on others, the other students have a right to say, I don't like that, and how to say it appropriately. Thank you, and thanks for coming, by the way. Yes?
All right, I'm going to go with a more general question. I'm Trey Holson. I'm a PhD student in education policy. This morning, we had to turn in a paper in Dr. Green's class about the most promising idea for education reform. So you stand up here as a special ed expert. I'd like to hear your comments on what's the most promising idea for special ed reform. Is it more cross schools? Is it different teacher training? Is it vouchers? I wrote a paper that was pretty general, so I'd like to hear something specific about just special ed reform.
I'm kind of riding this wave lately on one, positive behavioral supports. Okay, I don't know much about reform nationwide or special education, so I'll just say that and be careful. But in terms of special education, I also think, and this goes back to a talk I did at the National Rehabilitation Association's conference, I think job training is critical. I think a good segment of special ed students are going to get out of high school, even with a high school diploma, and perhaps still struggle in community college and still struggle with finding jobs. We're making it a point to try and make sure that students, with emotional behavior disorders, have some form of employment while they're in high school, because the data, other longitudinal studies, the National Longitudinal Transition Study, shows that when a kid with any kind of disability has a paid or even non-paid job while in high school, that's going to have more promising outcomes 3 to 5 years later in terms of being gainfully employed. So I don't know how that compares to other ideas of reform, but for me, that's what I'm focusing on right now, is to make sure they've got good transition education. Transition meaning transition from high school to post-high school. All right.
Maybe one final question?
You picked Dr. Wolf.
In the back.
Rebecca Carney, I'm a principal of On Your Mark Academy, and we're a school for specialty students in Fayetteville. My question is with reference to some mentor teaching that I did several years ago with some younger novice teachers. And I had observed some of these classroom meetings going very, very badly. What type of training would you suggest for running or what type of training do you offer at your school for teachers to help them run these meetings well? And particularly not just the guidelines for doing it. Obviously, you need to be a facilitator. But could they observe? You have references of video that they may be able to watch, so they can actually see it happen.
The type of training, you don't have to be a group therapist to run an effective class meeting, but you do need to be a facilitator, and you do need to understand maybe some dynamics, whether it be adolescents or children. I think teachers have a great head start, okay, in the sense that they can command, the classroom. I would have the school counselor. In terms of our school, we run the community meetings, the counselors, all right. But then eventually, we have the teachers run them, or we co-lead them, and that's been helpful to them. So even though they're not trained mental health clinicians or group psychotherapists and all that, they do very well because of the co-leading model with the counselor and the teacher. So, obviously, the school counselor, and I know that in the master's training programs, group counseling is a required course, as well as advanced group counseling, I believe, also. So that's one direction I would go. In terms of classroom meetings, just write down the name Jane Nelson, because there are training opportunities that are part of her association or program. Okay?
All right.
Thank you very much.